Now, many of you know that even going back decades, go back to even B.F. Skinner, teaching and technology, one of the visions there was to personalize learning. Now, we've come a really long way from B.F. Skinner, and what we know now is that personalization means recognizing unique student needs and unique student assets and building from there. Now, with the rise of generative AI and also autonomous teaching agent technology, it seems like we might be getting closer than ever to realizing a really substantive or compelling personalized learning. And our next panel is going to have that conversation before you. We would like to know more about what the evidence says, what are the possibilities. And to explore this conversation, we will have Sara Allan from Valhalla Foundation, Dilg from OpenAI, John Mitchell from Stanford University, Adeel Khan from Magic School, and Richard Charles joining us from Denver Public Schools. Please come on stage. And I'm going to leave my invisible microphone for Sara, who will be our moderator.
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sara Allan, and I, like many of the funders in the room, have been focused over the last decade or so on this concept of investing in innovative ideas and tools and practices and models that have the potential to really transform the role of the teacher and student outcomes. But I have to say, I, like many of my fellow funders, are sort of chastened by how hard it has been to actually get there. There are so many complicated factors that make it really hard to personalize learning. And it has been really hard to see, particularly in the last few years, meaningful improvement, both in the lives of teachers, as well as in the data around learning outcomes for students and all of the other things we see about students that are happening in today's schools. So we're at this really interesting point where we've got this incredible technology coming on board, building on past efforts around ed tech, but also the reality of how hard it is to operate schools in today's context. And so that's a really interesting challenge that we continue to face. One of the things that I think we all know is that it keeps coming back to the teacher to be the agent that personalizes learning, or at least thinks about how to do that. And teachers today are operating with lots of new kinds of tools, but not necessarily in a system that is enabling them to really put them into action in highly effective ways. And all these issues around data privacy and interoperability, I was around when InBloom was tried, and we're still fussing with all of those things. So I think we have to be both real and imaginative at the same time in talking about what AI can do, generative AI can do, and also all of the underlying infrastructure development that's going on with cloud technologies generally that have been a long time coming to really hit K-12 education. But the promise is still there. We're still optimistic, and I'm super excited to be here with this panel today. Earlier we talked about how these are multifaceted problems, and we have an incredibly multifaceted panel here today to talk about this issue of personalization. And I think what we all know is that it's really non-negotiable that we focus on the glorious diversity of our students, of our school context, of our communities, of our teachers, in how we design this next generation of systems. So that the needs of teachers and students are really what's anchoring all of this new research and development. And that's something that's hard to do, but seems more possible than ever before. But it's going to take a lot of different people coming at the problem in a bunch of different ways and experimenting in ways that produce real evidence of learning that we can all sort of really point at and see. So as we've talked about, it's important to bring a multifaceted group of people to a multifaceted problem, and I'm super excited to be joined by our panel today. You've all seen their amazing titles of what they're doing right now. We have a representative from big tech in Lane Dilg. We've got a CIO from a major school district that's doing a lot of experimentations in Charles. We have a ed tech founder here in Adeel who's really pushing the envelope on what AI can do in schools. And we have John, who's been a professor here at Stanford and working on these issues of how technology and education come together for a long time. But when you look underneath their bios, you also see that on this panel we have multiple teachers. We have multiple people who've been researchers. We have multiple people who've been builders of things and triers of things. We actually also have a counterterrorism specialist and someone who's been really focused a lot on child safety in Lane, as well as governance and policy issues broadly. So I'm really excited to hear what we all get into in this conversation, and we're just going to get right into it. So one of the things I wanted to start with was a little bit of definitional work. My mother is an 85-year-old former teacher, and I was imagining talking to her about this panel I was doing today on autonomous teaching agents and thinking about what questions she would ask me, which would probably be like, what the heck is an autonomous teaching agent? So I think we should start there. Personalization brings up a lot of ideas in people's minds, but as we think about AI and generative AI and new technologies, John, let's start with you. How would you frame for our crowd here today? What do we mean when we talk about agentic structures and autonomous agents?
Yeah, well, there's a technical term in this used in the field, and it comes from moving beyond just a model that can answer a question about a single sentence or a single next word to carry on a conversation. People use the term agentic architecture to refer to a language model or other model combined with a database and a loop that lets it carry on a conversation. But you can think of ChatGPT with an intention as an initial kind of model of what we mean by an agent.
So Adeel, maybe building on that, how would you describe your version of what personalization will look like, building on the idea of agentic structures and autonomous agents?
Yeah, I'll start from what I think is happening right now in classrooms that is the beginnings of this. So in Magic School, the product that we built, there's we have a writing feedback tool where a teacher can take the state testing writing rubric, they can attach it to the AI tool. They can then launch that tool to students, and the students can enter their essays, get areas of strength, areas of growth, and then after getting those areas of strength and areas of growth based on the rubric that was assigned by their teacher, they can continue the conversation. They can say, you said in my areas for growth that I have a bunch of run-on sentences. What is a run-on sentence? What are some ways that I can improve this? So that's kind of the first version of what I think personalized learning looks like, is that we're taking these AIs and they're augmenting the teacher's ability to do the thing that they want to do, which is give really great formative feedback in the moment to their students before they turn their essays in. And then if you think about down the line what this could look like, a future of generative AI in education might look like a partnership with a company like McGraw-Hill, who I see in the audience here. Yesterday on the curriculum that we used, Johnny got a 2 out of 5 on his exit quiz, and Joe got a 5 out of 5. The next day when the student comes to class, they see a warm-up activity that is customized based on their current performance in class. The 5 out of 5 student is getting pushed to more challenging work, and the student who got a 2 out of 5 is being pushed content to help them review the things that they got wrong the next day. That gets even better over time when we have longitudinal information about how the student learns, what makes them successful. The teacher's input is also super valuable in that equation because the teacher knows Johnny loves baseball. So when you can relate things to baseball, that's great. We work with content publishers to push out content, but really all content is generative. It's a version of the content that is based on these incredible research-based curriculums that are created by others, but then generative in the sense that it is personalized to the student based on their prior performance, as well as their learning styles, as well as their teacher's input and knowledge of their learning.
Could I just follow up on that? But just to give a few different directions, I think one obvious direction is this direction of personalized tutor, an individual student working with an AI agent. A second direction is teacher support, teacher lesson plan, teacher lesson preparation, other things like that. A third area has to do with collaborative learning. That could be a group of students or students with a teacher or mentor in some way. And then the fourth direction that I can see this going has to do with assessment. It's easier to do formative assessment. We have more success with that so far, but formative and summative assessment. So if you want to think of where could we apply AI and what could it be useful for, those four directions kind of give you some starting point.
So I think an immediate question that comes to mind then is like, where is the teacher in all of that? So why don't you jump into the conversation, Charles, and tell us a little bit more about like, where are you seeing the possibility to make all of these awesome possible applications and use cases really enhancing to teachers and the impact they have, and where might it go wrong?
So I'd like to start off by saying that kindergartners today, sitting in classrooms today, are the graduating class of 2036, right? And we have no idea of what that world is going to be like, do we? Right? In addition to that, the jobs that will exist in that future are yet to be defined and will probably challenge us in big ways to think about what it means to prepare students from a teacher perspective for a world we know nothing about for jobs that don't exist yet. It's a big problem. The good news is that we've done this before. When I was in kindergarten, the teachers had the same problem, right? So we have a chance to be able to do some exciting work. The difference is, I think the rapid pace of technology is problematic, the pace at which it's accelerating. It used to be that you would learn a particular technology and you'd have an entire career in that field. Electricity when it was invented, and different, washing machines and so on and so forth. So by the time a student graduates from, 11th grade and goes into 12th grade, technology, there may be 2 more releases of an iPhone in that time, right? So it's no longer about thinking about the specific technology. It's really giving students and teachers the ability to know themselves as learners. And I think this is where AI can help, and agents can help in this regard. If they know themselves as learners, how quickly they can learn, what's the best medium, what mode is the best for them, all of those issues start to come into play when we are thinking about how to prepare teachers for this world. And John was mentioning an agent for every student. A teacher can have multiple agents as well, right? An agent for every teacher. And those agents can talk every now and then, right? So, of course, from my CIO lens, I'm a little concerned whenever data starts getting shared, right? That's a big no-no in my world. And so the data security is a big challenge for us, but really shifting that focus to learning themselves, getting to know themselves as learners. One task that I did, and you should all try this at some point, if you're brave enough, is you go to ChatGPT or any one of the tools that you are inclined to use, and just say, based on my usage of this application, how would you describe me as a learner? And it starts to give you some very scary details about you as a learner. It will answer the question. And so, at the very least, it's a good starting point, in my opinion, but I think that's one of the ways that we can address that.
And talk to us a little bit more about, you can start to imagine a world where there's all these agents talk to each other and no people are actually talking to each other. So how do you think about building community in schools, building connections between students and teachers while also personalizing to the extent that we're talking about? Because you can start to sort of envision pretty extreme, that version of when Spock's on Vulcan in that little hologram with the teacher alone in his little cave. So how do we not go in that direction?
I've used that video. Do you know which video she's referring to? The one where Spock is sitting, it's in one of the Star Treks, or standing in a little bowl, and it's all regurgitation. Right? It's really a poor example of what that is to look like. I think with the advent of AI, the future is really going to rely on interpersonal more so. It's very, although there's a lot of energy and inertia around, let's use all of these technology tools to do some incredible things, the difference will be personalization. The tools have a lot of problems in them right now. Adeel and I have sat on a few panels in the past, and he'll probably say, Dr. Charles, you keep saying this over and over again. Well, it's because it's a concern of a CIO, right? When you ask ChatGPT or any one of the tools, LLM tools, for a solution to something or how to do something, it will give you all of the details if the guardrails are not put in place. Right now, the panel before us, you all were talking about the importance of making sure that research stays ahead of these tools. Research is way behind, and Stanford released that report last year to talk about that lagging effect that's happening. In my opinion, it's going to be really important for us as a collective to leverage AI to make sense of all of the information that's happening in a more rapid fashion like was just discussed, right? So why not leverage AI to be able to manage all of that so that we're not waiting a few months for a peer-reviewed article before it gets released and folks are actually using it in their school districts. So really important, but the personal human touch is going to be more important. There's a whole world, in my opinion, that would be opening up around that. And we have yet to start talking about what that is to look like for our future.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Charles. Adeel, let's go back to you for a second, and then Lane, I'm going to bring you in. Can you talk a little bit about how teachers are using Magic School and where you're seeing it as a way to actually connect them more closely to their students or students with each other? And how are you thinking about measuring outcomes? What kind of outcomes are important? And how are you going about doing this kind of experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with one, I'm an educator first and foremost. I was a teacher, I was a principal, I founded a public high school in Denver. And to the last point, every teacher that I hired, I let know that the foundation of our school are the relationships that we keep with our students. And that will not change in a world of AI. Relationships at the center of learning, no great learning happens without one, right? So I think that the AI doesn't necessarily change that for the current or long term, but I think of a future where students are given new tools of learning and these AI tools, and how much more inspiring learning can be. I was an English teacher, so I think writing is so important. So much of writing is just the construction of your thoughts. But I also, as an English teacher, thought it was miserable to write the same 5-paragraph essay 500 times to prepare you for an SAT. Why not spend some of that time building something or manifesting something in the world, using the new creative tools like video generation, image generation to create a movie, or do something with students where they can use AI tools to do meaningful research and manifest something in the world. Institutions like Stanford, we know that getting into a school like this, getting a perfect score on the SAT and a perfect GPA are table stakes. It's about what you manifested in the world. What's the portfolio of work that you did? And AI gives us this enormous set of tools to help us start doing more of that manifestation and making that more mainstream, and not just for the elite who get into a school like this. So that's kind of an answer to the last question, but it's just I'm passionate about it. I think the future of education can look so much more inspiring with these tools as equipment and accelerate us toward a future that I think we all want, which is focusing most of our attention on the higher level thinking, creativity, student voice flourishing. That gets me really excited as an educator. Teachers are using Magic School for all kinds of reasons. There are 70 different use cases on the co-pilot part of the platform, where educators can do things like help them get ideas for lesson plans, help them build a support plan for a student who's struggling, do things like get coaching on behavior management, as a thought partner. Hey, I'm struggling with getting my kids to sit in their seats. Real practical things that happen in schools. I can tell you as a principal, this is a challenge. So there's so many ways that AI can be a just-in-time help for an educator. But I'll go back to the example of the students getting writing feedback. The writing feedback tool was used in a district near me in Colorado called Aurora Public Schools, and they just credited Magic School with a 28% improvement for state-level literacy outcomes by using that tool in their classroom, where that classroom teacher was able to get formative feedback every single time the students had a writing assignment before they turned it in. And that teacher at the end of the year, because he'd been able to do that at every single juncture when they were practicing for their state test that included a writing section, the students had probably 10x the feedback they could have gotten throughout the school year because they were using AI to get that formative feedback before turning in their final essay to their teacher. So we're seeing real results from using this in the classroom when used in these really practical ways. So I always balance it between there's this really practical thing that Magic School can do right now in driving outcomes and assisting teachers and saving their workloads. And then AI has this really inspiring future too, where education can start looking completely different and more inspiring for our students.
That's great. So Lee, I mean, OpenAI has done an incredible thing in sort of democratizing access to this suite of incredibly powerful tools to do the kind of like self-generated content, creative work, et cetera, to both students and teachers. But at the same time, we have this challenge that like we have a lot of very specific context variables, attributes, outcomes that we seek in education that a general tool may not get us there. So would love to hear a little bit more about how OpenAI is thinking about working with organizations like Magic School or others, or Denver Public Schools or whoever, to figure out ways to bring what you can to that party while also allowing those that are really much closer to the use cases in education to drive a lot of the development.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many threads here to pick up on, and just looking around the room and thinking through all of the things that you're researching and exploring right now. I think at OpenAI, at our core, we are a research and deployment company that's focused on foundation models. So we want our models to be as useful to people as they can be, to help people solve problems across many, many different fields. Education, and particularly learning, is obviously one of the most organic use cases for ChatGPT and models generally. And I think we're excited about that because as we look at the ways that we are continuing to develop models, things like multimodal, multilingual, the ability to interact voice to voice and all of these different things, the use cases for learning are quite interesting. And I say that as the mom of a child who is a very particular kind of learner. You can see how people interact in different ways and are able to learn and be inspired in different ways. I think as we look at that, we also, and I'll tell you by background, I actually am longtime public sector. So one of the things I am most passionate about personally is how do we help public institutions, and particularly institutions that may be under-resourced, how do we help people to get to the problems that they really want to solve? I think in education, that is some of the area where we're starting directly. So looking at higher education, we see how we can help with back-end administration. We see how we can help in research fields. We do hope that we will, that you will use some of the tools to accelerate research and be able to bring research to its users more quickly, and we see that happening in a lot of different spaces. I think in the K-12 space, we're much more cautious right now. We are very interested in supporting administrators. We are very interested in supporting educators. We want our tools to be accessible, and we particularly want our tools to be accessible to educators broadly. That is very important to us. When it comes to students in the classroom, though, we deeply appreciate Adeel, Khan Academy, many, many others who are already thinking about and deploying into classrooms in a student interface. And we think that there is a tremendous amount of learning that needs to be done in that space, and that builds on, obviously, generations of research and generations of one-to-one teaching and learning. And I think that that is the piece that we are most excited about. So we hope that our models, the underlying models, will be as beneficial and useful for teaching and learning as they can be. But in terms of actual deployment, the space we're focused first in K-12 in particular really is supporting educators.
And Dr. Charles, and maybe Adeel, actually all of you, please feel free to comment on this question, which is, so how do you think about supporting teachers to sort of directly experiment with freely available tools versus thinking about the whole enterprise, the whole user interface for students, for parents, for teachers, and sort of curating and orchestrating what needs to be there for safety, but also to ensure we have really great quality outcomes?
Yeah, you know, professional development is at the core of what we're doing right now. We do use Magic School AI. There is a total of about 4 products, software products that we're using with AI. Every vendor on the planet is now slapping AI on their product or service, okay? And so there is a need for us to distinguish what's happening and what's really AI. Is it just an API to one of the platforms, or is it something more meaningful? And so we are looking at this in a two-pronged approach. We're looking at it from an instructional perspective on how it can impact instruction, and then operationally, how we can leverage it for things like scheduling of buses, master scheduling of different school schedules, and things of that nature. One of the things that we also did was we worked closely with the Council of Great City Schools and the Consortium of School Networks to get ahead of the curve on that and establish the K-12 AI readiness checklist. And so we were one of 4 school districts that took part in that work. And we also believe that teachers are the best teachers of themselves, right? So they love to listen to each other, and so we are highlighting teachers in our system who are using things like Hey Gen, or using Magic School in a unique way to do translations, and a ton of use cases. So we're carefully monitoring that work. From my perspective, we went from about 800 software applications that were running on our network, and we're now down to 200, and that's still a heck of a lot for me. And so we revamped the entire process, software purchase process, and they have to come through the technology department now to do that. And so our data privacy agreements are now reflecting that it has been vetted in some way.
Maybe I could jump out a little bit further into the future, since that's kind of what our department is about, is creating future things. I mean, one direction that seems really promising has to do, you can think of it with this, like simulation. No one would really go fly an airplane without using a flight simulator. The flight simulator is not the same as the airplane, but it lets someone learn something in a different kind of environment that then can be used to fly the plane. And I think we've seen a lot of use of AI currently in the near term and right now as simulated conversation to practice and refine one's capacity to do something. We have a free, every year, introductory computer science course for 10,000 students. We do that with 1,000 volunteer teachers. We therefore have a teacher training program. In that, we give the people who raise their hand and say, yeah, I can teach Python, no problem. We give them some instruction on how to handle conversations with the students. And in the practice part of that, we did an A/B study. I think Julia Markle might be here and is partly responsible for this. Some of the learning, the volunteer teachers practiced with humans, some practiced with AI. The results are actually better for the practice with AI because it's non-threatening. There's no time pressure. They have a chance to think about how they would respond to questions and do that. If you think of other things like conflict resolution, or different kinds of active listening activities or things like that, you can practice them with AI. So I think there's one direction where I think that it's quite promising. We've built a system in my group called Chat Collab. It's a way of, it's a simulation kind of environment that lets any number of humans interact with any number of AI agents. And we've experimented with this for learning programming in a collaborative setting. I think that's where anyone who wants to go out into a career in programming has to learn how to be a good team collaborator to respond to others and so on. So I think we can build some kind of learning environments with AI that really give students and learners different opportunities to perfect things that we're not doing as good a job on right now.
Well, let's build on that for a second, and I'm just ask each of you to maybe envision the future a little bit more. And if we're sitting on this stage 5 years from now, what will we be pointing at as examples of great personalized learning models? What would have enabled us to be there that we should be focusing on right now, whether it's focusing on the way we do experimentation, how we support teachers, what kinds of use cases we're focused on. So where do you hope we're headed, and then what do we need to do right now to make sure we get there? Let's start with you, Adeel.
You know, our theory from the start was, you know, our slogan is "Teachers are magic," which is a catchy slogan. But also it's the ethos of the company, is that the teachers are at the center of the universe of a child's learning experience. When we launched the product, you know, all of the hype around AI, when OpenAI's ChatGPT was catching on, was around infinitely patient tutors would teach our children. And anyone who's worked in a school building knows that put a kid in a corner with a computer, that's not a learning experience. Kids don't learn that way. But when a teacher is enabled with this technology and understands it deeply, they will be incredibly creative in how they use this with their students. And we have seen that, I'm sure OpenAI has seen that through the product they've built, of like these use cases that people come up with because they understand their profession, they understand their context of their students much more deeply than I will or anyone else will. So enabling educators to understand how to use this technology, give them easy entry points, and also give them room to experiment, per the last question. I think we're gonna see educators take this in incredible directions that support their students, because that is the way they're wired. They're gonna take whatever resources are put in front of them and make a more meaningful learning experiences for their students. And it is folks like us who are technologists and leaders in the space, it's incumbent upon us to equip them with these tools and make them you know, as useful as possible for them to experiment with. But at the end of the day, it's about trusting teachers and empowering them with this technology.
Awesome. Great, Lee, and I'm going to jump to you, and we'll come back to you in a minute, John.
Yes, I think, you know, it's such a great question. It's funny, I don't know that I've ever been asked it before, which I love. But I do think, you know, looking 5 years ahead, really focusing on access being broad, particularly, we work not only domestically, but also globally. Hard to reach populations. We work with the International Rescue Committee on children in crisis situations, really using the tools for those truly hard to reach children, I think is one of the things I would really love to see in 5 years. I think the other is teacher job satisfaction, that we really have focused on that, and that teachers and educators truly are feeling improvements in job satisfaction day to day. And then I think the third is really is solving hard problems, that at every level, we really are using the technology to power human ingenuity and creativity, and to think about new ways to solve problems. And that may indeed be for little people and big people, but I think that really is the goal, that you have this new tool to try to solve the problems that are in front of you.
Maybe take one example, just take math learning, which seems like a very clear and codified sort of a process. And you can imagine, and there's been a lot of research on games and different methods for young people and older to learn math fundamentals, but math is also challenging and threatening to some people. It's difficult. It's not an area where everyone feels like it's accessible to them. So we could look at that problem too also with AI and try to develop different mechanisms for kids to come at a topic like that from different perspectives, become comfortable with it, maybe have a better experience than many of the kids are having now. And I think that kind of direction, which has been kind of difficult to experiment with at a scale that produces data that lets us iterate and find better methods, that could be done with AI. Back to your point, Charles, about collecting data and analyzing this, that's another direction where I think we've seen a lot of initial success and promise is using AI to automate the kind of research that's done in education and social science, to look at transcripts of interaction and try to figure out what was happening, what was good, what was bad. Did an intervention provide some success or an advantage or not? I think we'll be able to automate that and in that way scale better research into problems that have been difficult and challenging over time.
Dr. Charles, I'm going to give you the final answer on this one, and then we're going to turn to the audience for some questions.
Sure.
So please jump in.
So 3 areas, in my opinion, over the next 5 years. One is bias and sterilization. Right now, these tools have some challenges around being biased. I just wrote an article in AERA about this, some of the issues that I was able to uncover. That's one. The mathematics piece, I agree with you, John. I think as a mathematician who has a passion for mathematics, I was very disappointed to hear the 4 students talk earlier about mathematics the way that they did. It is a beautiful subject. I think the way that it's taught is problematic, and this is coming from a mathematician, keep that in mind. We are horrible at communicating ideas, okay? So there's work to be done in that arena, and John, you and I have talked about that. And then the third one is knowledge management, organizational knowledge management. How wonderful it would be if every organization knows all of the information, all of its policies, practices, and procedures, so that you have a single one-stop shop to be able to ask any question that you would like. And when someone leaves the organization, you know where the gaps are in the organization. And all of a sudden, you have a way to do recruitment that's very, very targeted. So we're working with Google on that, and we're in the early stages right now and trying to figure out the details of what that is to look like. The wonderful thing about that as well is that you now have an expert system that you can ask more targeted, very specific questions of that you couldn't do before. And that's the sort of thing that these AI tools can really address.
Fantastic. All right, I think we've got time for maybe one question. Who's got one?
It's a perfect presentation.
Yeah, right. Well, we've solved every problem.
I wasn't going to ask because Dr. Charles sort of got to a little bit of what I was going to ask about there at the end, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists on this. He spoke earlier about how research is currently having to catch up with where the technology is, right? And I think one of the places that it is very quickly catching up is where the biases are sort of naturally just in the systems, in these models, right? There was an article in Nature this past summer that showed that a lot of these models show some of the most covertly racist opinions of dialect ever recorded experimentally, right? And so when I think about using those as a former teacher and now as an education data scientist, that immediately brings up a lot of red flags for me, that we're talking about these at-scale implementations at district levels of some of the largest districts in the country, but then we find that out, right? And so something I'd love to hear from the panel is, how are you all thinking about the dangers of implementing those things? And then, the results of those, right? Mitigating those harms, or I would even go as far as removing those harms, right? So I'd love to hear about how you all are thinking about that and where both the mathematics and also the productization of this plays a role in that.
Yeah.
I'll let you all go first.
Lane, do you want to take that one on first? And then
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit at OpenAI, and it'd be interesting to hear at different stages as well. So our safety process is effectively 3 steps, and I do think it's somewhat helpful to understand them. The first is to teach the models, and so we do try to remove, we try to filter out any sort of harmful content in the training of the models. We also have online, and this is actually an interesting document for those who are interested, something called the model spec, which talks a little bit about how we train the models effectively to know right from wrong. So what the models are actually taught about how they should behave. So we spend a considerable amount of time teaching the models. We then also test really considerably before anything is deployed. And that's red teaming, it's evaluations, and all of those spaces, I think, really important for this group because it always needs to get better. And so what kind of bias should be tested and evaluated for is a question at many different stages of the, both of the model training, but then also post-deployment. And so what those evaluations and what the red teaming should look like is a space where I think we will see considerable research and should and must see considerable research. And then the last stage of our process, honestly, is to share at an alpha level, to share betas, and then ultimately through something like ChatGPT to share quite broadly. And you will see us do that a little bit differently with different kinds of models. So if you look at ChatGPT, a research preview that we released quite broadly, and that there was much more uptake even than we expected. If you look at Sora, it's still not released, right? So we showed our text-to-video model many months ago, but we still haven't released it because we are still in the internal, really teach, test, and share part of that process. But those are stages before any model is deployed as a model. I think then once you get to the product, there's a whole nother level of test and evaluate to make sure that the model is fit for purpose and fit for its domain, and bias to the question asker's point, can be quite domain specific. And so the testing and evaluating there needing to be even more precise, even more plentiful, et cetera.
Can I just add one thing about this? So sterilization, I referred to it earlier. It's where you ask the model, I asked a series of questions, and one of them was, show me examples of folks who've been impacted by slavery, okay? No response. And the reason there's no response is because somehow the system has learned that stay away from any controversial topic, really, more than anything else, when it could be more thoughtful in how that's done, so.
So I spent 20 years in the field of computer security. I'm guessing this problem is not going to be solved easily anytime soon, okay?
Adeel, do you want to add to this? This is a super important topic, so we're not going to cut this one off. Keep going.
I definitely have thoughts. I think, one, when students use our platform, we have like a responsibility flag that tells them that there is going to be inherently bias in this, systems, things like that. We have some guardrails in the system. We also just, the way that teachers launch the product to students is the students can't use it unless the teacher has actually launched it to them and have given them permission. The teacher also kind of monitors on their end the way that the interaction's going for the student. They get like notifications through moderation systems to understand how that conversation is going. And we just think that's a way better way for a student to be introduced to AI than logging into Snapchat and seeing my Snapchat friend, right? My AI friend on Snapchat, or going into Meta and being forced into something. We think that under the guidance of their teacher, we provide lessons on AI literacy and things like that before they get started, is way more, a much better method than just going out into the world and like Apple just integrated AI onto the iPhone. Like this is in the world. Kids cannot avoid it. It's rather, do we want them to be educated about it and understand the limitations, the opportunities, the risks associated with it under the guidance of a teacher, or do we want them to try to figure this out on our own? We would always take the answer of figuring out with their teacher and understanding what this is before just discovering it on their own. So we're righteous in our cause here. We think it's super important for this to be taught in schools. California just passed a law saying that schools must teach about AI. And we think that's just incredibly important. And doing that with your teacher is way better than just finding it on your own.
Well, we're going to have to stop there, although we could sit up here all afternoon and talk about this particular topic. The world is racing ahead and offering things to young people outside of school that, are really not as thoughtfully designed as what you're doing. And so I think this is going to be an incredible tension for the next decade. We'll have to take that one back up over drinks later, perhaps. But I want to please join me in thanking our incredible panelists.